Emma Carter was born and raised in a small town called Cedar Grove in the state of Ohio. The town was quiet, provincial, with a single main avenue proudly called Central Street. Emma spent most of her childhood and youth among wooden houses with neat lawns, small cafes, and yellow foliage that, in autumn, turned the town into a colorful picture, like a scene from an impressionist painting. A quiet, peaceful place. Here, everyone knew each other, and in the evenings when the sun sank below the smooth horizon lines, the air was filled with the scent of freshly mowed grass and baked goods from Mrs. Philbright's local bakery. Since childhood, Emma had dreamed of big cities and bright lights. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. She read magazines with photos of celebrities, imagining herself walking down an expensive boutique-lined street with shopping bags from designer stores, or sitting at a social event, watching people in elegant suits. Instead, she spent her time behind the counter at Sunny Bakery, where her mother worked, and in the remaining hours leafed through fashion magazines, listened to town gossip, and dreamed. The family had little money. Emma's father left when she was 8, leaving her mother with modest savings. Since then, every penny was saved. But one thing remained unchanged. Emma was raised with the belief that success could be achieved by choosing the right partner in life. Marrying well was almost the family motto, passed down from woman to woman. Her grandmother told her mother told Emma. However, no one ever mentioned true love. It was about the right choice, a pragmatic approach to marriage. And Emma, as long as she could remember, subconsciously adopted this belief, making it part of her plans for the future. After graduating from school and attending the local college, she worked at 2 or 3 jobs simultaneously to save money. Finding a good-paying job in Cedar Grove was tough, so when the opportunity to move to a big city presented itself, she seized it with both hands. Thus, at the age of 23, Emma found herself in Chicago. She rented a tiny room from an elderly couple, Mr. and Miss Pratt, in an old brick building in the Lakeview neighborhood. Although the apartment had thin walls, the heating often malfunctioned, and the stairwells smelled of something old and slightly musty. From her window she could see Lake Michigan, and it took only 10 minutes by bus to reach downtown. Emma was undeterred by the inconveniences. She was in a big city, where life bubbled and flowed like a full river. At first, the city was indifferent to her. Emma looked for work in offices, coffee shops, stores, and eventually got a job as an administrator at a small beauty salon owned by Sisters Grace and Gail Anderson. The pay was average, but the team was warm, and the salon was located near one of the prestigious neighborhoods of the city. Emma liked watching the wealthy clients who came in for expensive procedures, women in furs, men in expensive suits or stylish casual outfits. She studied these details, involuntarily comparing them with what she herself wore, and noted how far her current life was from the one she had dreamed of. Nevertheless, she firmly decided her ticket to the future was a successful marriage. The ideal for her was a mature, established man with a stable business or career, his own home, and the ability to share all the comforts of life. She didn't see anything wrong with her plans. For her, this was the quickest way out of the dull provincial life to acquire money, status, and security for the future. The long-standing family advice was deeply ingrained in her mind. A few months had passed since Emma settled in Chicago. She had managed to establish a small circle of acquaintances, mostly her clients at the salon, who often chatted with her while booking appointments, and her neighbor, a student named Casey. Emma's childhood friends, those still living in the hometown, would message her on social media, admiring photos of the big streets and skyscrapers, while Emma increasingly embraced the role of a city girl. One cool autumn evening, a striking blonde named Sandra Wells came into the salon. She had come for a styling before a social event. Sandra turned out to be a talkative woman in her 40s, with a light southern accent and the grace of a model. While the stylist worked on her hair, Sandra spoke with Emma, asking about the city and her plans. Emma, enchanted by this woman's lively manner, shared that she had just arrived and dreamed of a good life. Sandra noticed the clear ambition in her voice, which amused her. "If you're interested," Sandra said, pulling out an expensive wallet and leaving a generous tip. "I have connections. I organize events for businessmen, politicians, and my husband's friends. Maybe you'll have a chance to meet someone." Emma flushed with excitement, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. She thanked Sandra profusely, and Sandra handed her a business card, adding, "Call me. If there are events, I'll take you as a hostess or assistant. There are always plenty of wealthy men, believe me." When Sandra left the salon, Emma stood there for a few minutes, staring at the business card in her hands. Sandra Wells, event manager. Short and to the point. From that moment, all she could think about were these social events, eagerly anticipating how she would grab her lucky ticket. And indeed, a week later, Sandra called Emma and invited her to work at a charity reception at a prestigious hotel on Michigan Avenue. Without hesitation, Emma agreed. She bought a simple but elegant black dress on sale, knee-length. Shoes were neat pumps with a low heel. She prepared seriously, aiming to look classy and attractive, but not vulgar. The evening of the charity reception exceeded all Emma's expectations. A huge hall, music, tables with floral arrangements, ladies in luxurious evening gowns. Sandra had Emma greet guests at the entrance with another hostess. Emma smiled politely, handing out event programs and occasionally exchanging a few words of greeting. Among the guests were Sandra's acquaintances, businessmen, philanthropists, journalists. And then, around the middle of the evening, Emma saw him, a tall, slightly graying man in a classic dark grey suit. He entered the hall with the air of a host, confident and calm, instantly drawing attention to himself. Sandra, seeing him, smiled, and with a quick motion took Emma by the arm and walked over to introduce them. "Marek, let me introduce you to my new assistant, Emma Carter. Emma, this is Marek Whitman, a businessman, sponsor of many charity projects." Emma shyly smiled and noticed a friendly but slightly mocking smile on Marek's lips. He was clearly wealthy and authoritative, and it showed in every move, how he carried himself, his smooth, even voice, and the way he looked directly into Emma's eyes. "Nice to meet you, Emma," he said, extending his hand. "How long have you been working with Sandra?" Emma felt a little embarrassed, but composed herself and nodded slightly in gratitude. "To be honest, this is my first time attending such an event. I'm really glad I had the chance to see how these things work." Sandra winked at Marek, as if highlighting that Emma was her discovery, but didn't add anything further. This was the first meeting between Emma and Marek, an event that would define many turns in Emma's life. Emma quickly adapted to her role and impressed Sandra. After the event, Sandra was delighted with how skillfully and carefully Emma had helped the guests. She praised her attentiveness and offered to have her work at the next reception. "Of course," Emma agreed. That night, she couldn't fall asleep, replaying Marek Whitman's image in her head. He had a soft, slightly mocking gaze and elegant, confident movements. Although he was clearly older than Emma had expected, he appeared to be around 50 while she was only 23. There was a certain status about him that she was looking for. Of course, Emma didn't yet know anything about his family situation, his character, or whether he had any secrets or skeletons in the closet, but that didn't concern her much. In her mind, a plan formed immediately, how to find a way to get closer to him and grab his attention. A couple of weeks later, Sandra invited Emma to a private dinner for investors at a small restaurant on the lakeshore. It was a gathering of potential sponsors for a major construction project, and, of course, Marek was also there. Once again, Emma was on standby, greeting guests, escorting them to their tables, occasionally checking if everything was okay. At some point, Marek, seeing her, walked over and struck up a casual conversation. "How do you like Chicago? Are you getting used to the city?" he asked, as they stepped aside a little further from the bustle of the room. "The city is amazing," Emma sighed. "I'm still just starting to get to know it. I found a job recently. I live in Lakeview, and I'm really glad I got the chance to see these events from the inside." Marek smiled, noticing the spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Lakeview is a wonderful place. I used to live there in my youth when I first started my business, but then I moved closer to downtown. It's more convenient for office commuting. You know, I remember when Lakeview was still a bohemian area, but now everything's changed there." There was something warm in their conversation. Marek didn't seem like a man trying to charm a young woman. On the contrary, he behaved with calm, almost paternal kindness. He asked Emma about her life, but without crossing boundaries, and even recommended a few places she should visit. Emma listened, nodded, feeling her insides freeze. This was the man she had dreamed of. Confident, wealthy, not too young, with a certain established position in society. Next, Emma asked Sandra about him. Sandra raised an eyebrow and replied, "Marek is more or less okay. He's had serious relationships, but I think he's single now. He never talks about his family, but I don't think he's been married. Technically, he was once married, but he divorced a long time ago. Not sure why. I don't dig into those details. He's successful, owns several hotels and restaurant chains in the Midwest. Of course, he has money, and his character's fine, though he can be tough in business, but with friends he's always generous and open." Armed with this information, Emma saw her path clearly. She needed to find a way to get closer to Marek, and fate, it seemed, was on her side. One evening, Marek asked Sandra to invite Emma to dinner to discuss some details of an upcoming charity event. In fact, he could have spoken directly to Sandra, but for some reason, he singled out Emma. Emma couldn't refuse, and gladly agreed. They met at the quiet Edison Grill restaurant, where Marek often dined with business partners. Soft jazz played in the background, and the view of the night city stretched outside the windows. Marek proved to be a pleasant conversationalist. He asked Emma about her family, where she came from, how she grew up, what she liked. Like a born psychologist, he knew how to ask questions that made the other person feel calm and at ease. Emma, on the one hand, tried to show that she was an intelligent, educated girl, and on the other hand, cautiously but confidently made it clear that she was very interested in him as a man. She laughed at his jokes, listened attentively to his stories about business, and when he touched on future plans, she muttered something like, "Sometimes I think it's really hard to do it alone in this city." By the end of dinner, it was clear that an unusual spark of attraction had formed between them. Though Marek didn't rush into any overt gestures, Emma could feel it. Just a little more, and he'd ask her to meet him without any excuses. Talking about business with Sandra was just a pretext. And so it happened. Soon after, Marek invited Emma for a walk along the lake, and then they started spending evenings at the theatre, visiting galleries, and having dinners that no longer had anything to do with work. He became infatuated with her, finding something fresh and youthful in Emma, and she played along, constructing an image of a caring, soft girl who, although not from the highest circle, was trying her best to fit in. Of course, at times it was difficult for her to hide that she wasn't very familiar with fine wines, confused the names of famous actors or artists, but Marek saw even that as a kind of charm, unlike the women from his circle who were oversaturated with glamorous polish. Gradually, they began dating as a couple, although Emma often asked herself, "Does he love me?" She couldn't say for sure. Sometimes she felt like he treated her slightly condescendingly, as if she were a young girl just beginning her life, someone he had to guide. But that didn't hurt her. She understood that for Marek, who had been through a divorce and experienced a lot in life, she was a breath of fresh air, someone admiring and kind. The most important thing was that he was gradually opening up to her, inviting her to his country house by the Fox River, showing her his office, introducing her to several friends and business partners. 6 months into their relationship, when Emma was already 24 and Marek 51, he asked her to move in with him. She agreed without hesitation. He lifted a burden from her shoulders, no more rent to pay, and she moved her things with the help of his driver in 1 day. His apartment in a prestigious Chicago neighborhood turned out to be even more luxurious than she had expected. A spacious living room with panoramic windows, a kitchen furnished with top-of-the-line appliances, soft carpets, and a pleasant color palette. What impressed Emma the most was the view of the lake and the skyscrapers. In the evenings, the city lights sparkled in a multitude of bright dots, and on clear days she could watch the colorful sunset. She became increasingly convinced that her plan to marry a wealthy, mature man was about to come true, and it soon did. Marek took her on vacation to Florida, and on the beach, with the sound of the surf, he proposed, handing her a beautiful diamond ring. Emma didn't hesitate and said, yes. Inside, she felt a triumphant sense of victory. She had managed to achieve her goal, to charm him, someone who had seemed out of reach. Of course, Emma didn't feel some deep, trembling love. Rather, she felt satisfaction that her plans were coming true. But as Marek looked at her with loving eyes, kissed her hand, made her breakfast, or bought her expensive gifts, she began to almost believe that she was in love with him. Almost. Everything was progressing according to plan. The engagement, numerous congratulations from Marek's friends, and then they set the wedding date. In early summer, to catch the best weather. The wedding took place in the garden of his country house, and it was truly luxurious. A small ceremony. But everything was well thought out. White tents, live music, high-class catering, a photographer, and decor that was cutting edge. Emma sparkled in an expensive silk and lace wedding gown, while Marek gleamed in a classic tuxedo. There were often envious looks from some women in Marek's circle. Some whispered that Emma was too young and was clearly after his millions. But the outward appearance hid either everything. In the eyes of society, they looked like a beautiful couple, a mature, confident man and a young, but, as many thought, genuine woman. A few months after the wedding, Emma enjoyed her new privileges. She no longer worked with Sandra, no longer worked at the salon. Marek thought it was better for her to focus on herself, the home, and simply relax. The car with a driver was at her disposal. She went shopping, met friends, made connections, and increasingly immersed herself in the high society. Her childhood experience of moving quickly in new environments helped her navigate her new life. Therefore, getting acquainted with the wives of Marik's partners, talking about evening dresses, restaurants, and country clubs wasn't a burden for her. But a different thought was growing inside her, a bolder and more dangerous one. What if I try to get not just status from this marriage, but part of the fortune, and then live my life peacefully? She started pondering the legal aspects of their union. Did she know what the prenuptial agreement contained? Had she signed anything? Yes, she had signed some papers, but hadn't really looked into the details. She thought that since Marek was so in love with her, he wouldn't let her be left with nothing. But the worries grew. What if, in the case of a divorce, she didn't get a penny? Meeting some acquaintances, she listened to stories about how rich men, after a divorce, cut off their ex-wives to the bare minimum. It scared her, yet at the same time, it spurred her into action. In her mind, a cynical plan was taking shape. Find evidence of her husband's infidelity, file for divorce, accuse him of cheating, and get significant alimony or a division of assets. After all, in the eyes of the court, this would be a strong argument. The only obstacle left was the infidelity itself. Marek, it seemed, was completely focused on Emma and wasn't looking at other women. But she didn't give up hope. Men over 50 with a lot of money usually fall for attention from women. The key is to set up the right situation. The more Emma lived in luxury, the clearer it became to her. She didn't want to stay all her life as the wife of a big boss. Of course, she could enjoy shopping, attending social events and traveling, but deep down, she felt a bit like a prisoner, dependent on his mood and money. Plus, there were still no children between them, and although Emma outwardly portrayed herself as a submissive wife, she longed for the real thrill of youth. Gradually, her mind began to form a plan to stage a fake affair, and then the marriage would collapse quickly and in her favor. She needed an accomplice for this plan. Soon, one appeared of her own accord. Emma's friend from college, Rachel Jackson, had long since moved from Ohio to Cincinnati, then back to Chicago, and was now getting by with odd jobs. Rachel was extravagant, carefree, and sometimes a little rebellious. She loved parties, hangouts, and easily started romances. For Emma, she was the perfect bait to lure Marek in. One day, during a coffee meetup, Emma cautiously steered the conversation to the topic. How unfortunate it was that Marek had no company of young women to keep him entertained. After a few more words, Emma asked Rachel, "Would you like to get to know my husband better?" "Of course. Formally. Just to distract him. I'll tell you where he goes, where his office is, which restaurants he likes. You could accidentally bump into him." Rachel raised an eyebrow, carefully looking at Emma. "Are you sure you want this? Aren't you afraid that he'll actually become interested in me?" Emma, biting her lip slightly, replied, "That's exactly what I want. Let him become interested. Just make sure I have evidence. Photos, messages, maybe even video, just in case. Of course, I'll organize everything and pay, and you'll get a good fee if it works." Rachel pressed her lips together and chuckled softly. "Interesting game. Well, let's give it a try. But are you sure he'll bite? After all, he's in love with you from what you've told me." "Yes, he's attached to me, but men like novelty, especially when it's a new, daring woman. Plus, nobody cancels simple human curiosity." Rachel agreed, and they began to work on their operation. Emma told her where Marek typically went on Fridays after work. He liked to visit a private business club where he met with partners. On Tuesdays, he had breakfast at a particular restaurant. Soon, Rachel began accidentally appearing at these places in a way that would catch his attention. Stylish clothes, confident gestures, and always a light excuse to start a conversation. For example, dropping her purse or asking for help choosing wine. Now it was just a matter of waiting for Marek to show interest. At first, Emma secretly delighted in the fact that Marek occasionally mentioned the mysterious woman who kept running into him. He would mention that she smiled at him, then shyly, but with interest, looked away. Emma egged him on. Well, maybe it's fate. Go ahead, talk to her, making it seem like she was just joking. He laughed and shrugged it off, but the seed of doubt and curiosity was growing. Then one day, exactly as Emma had planned, Marek came home in a good mood and confessed that the very same woman, Rachel, had introduced herself, and they had shared a coffee. Emma pretended to be indifferent. Well, that's great. The more friends, the merrier. Even though inside she was jubilant. This marked the beginning of Marek and Rachel's interactions. As the plan unfolded, Emma remained on edge, secretly fearing that real feelings might take the lead. What if Marek really fell in love with Rachel? Then Emma's role would be devalued. But Rachel reassured her. Relax, I'm not serious with him. I'm after money, and this adventure is interesting to me. Everything will go as you planned. Rachel regularly updated Emma on her chance meetings with Marek, and he increasingly spoke about his wife, saying things like, "She has a golden heart. She'll understand if I occasionally meet with friends." At the same time, Emma encouraged her husband's freedom. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't make scenes of jealousy, and subtly habituated him to the idea that he too needed space. She acted as if she were busy with her friends, shopping, beauty salons, spa trips, while he was preoccupied with business meetings. Sometimes their schedules wouldn't overlap for several days. One evening, Rachel sent Emma a concerned message. He invited me to his office for a private dinner. Just him, me, and one other partner. What should I do? Emma advised her to be as friendly as possible, but not throw herself at him, allowing Marek to make the first move. This was all part of the carefully thought-out plan. In the following weeks, Rachel began receiving more attention from Marek. He gave her flowers, a designer handbag, and once invited her to a charity event, but she claimed to be busy. Meanwhile, both Rachel and Emma understood that they needed substantial proof. So Rachel secretly recorded their conversations on her phone's voice recorder, took selfies where Marek was hugging her in the parking lot or at a restaurant. Sometimes she tried to lure him into a hotel room under the pretense of being tired and needing to rest, but still, Marek remained cautious. Perhaps, deep down, he still felt loyal to Emma or was afraid of being caught. Then, one evening, when Marek told Emma that he was going on a business trip for the weekend, Emma knew exactly what was happening. He was meeting with Rachel, and she herself had nudged him towards these plans. Rachel texted Emma that Marek was taking her to a small country hotel on the outskirts of Wisconsin. For Emma, this was the opportunity to obtain undeniable evidence. Rachel sent her the room number they were staying in, and Emma prepared to hire a private detective to take compromising photos. Instead, two emotions battled: adrenaline from the closeness to her plan's completion, and fear that everything could go wrong. But she had already gone too far. Moreover, thoughts of a prosperous future, full of financial independence, soothed her soul. On Saturday morning, Marek left, blowing Emma a kiss and promising to call in the evening. She smiled at him as he left, thinking that Rachel was already waiting for him in the car, ready for their romantic weekend. The private detective Emma hired introduced himself on the phone as Jack Lawrence. He had worked on similar cases for years: marital infidelities, missing persons, gathering evidence. Emma had negotiated a good payment as long as he took the photos and videos. Lawrence arrived early to check into the same country hotel, posing as a tourist. In the evening, when Marek and Rachel arrived, Lawrence was already watching them from the lobby. According to his report, which Emma received later, they acted like a couple. They ordered one room, held hands, and joked with each other. The detective quietly captured everything on camera, of course, using a small device. Later, when they went to have dinner at the hotel's restaurant, Lawrence positioned himself at a far table, from where he could discreetly record the video. Then, the key moment happened. Marek and Rachel, dining by candlelight, were drinking wine, and it seemed that Marek opened up even more. The detective filmed him kissing Rachel's hand and then kissing her on the lips. For court purposes, this was more than enough. At the end of the evening, Marek and Rachel went up to their room together, and Lawrence continued filming from the hallway when they entered the room. The next morning, Emma received confirmation from Lawrence that the evidence was ready. She was overwhelmed with triumph. Now she had everything she needed to make Marek the culprit in their divorce and demand a generous settlement. After all, in most U.S. states, proof of infidelity could greatly influence the court's decision, especially if it was stipulated in an agreement, or if the judge considered it a significant factor. On Sunday evening, Marek returned home. Emma pretended he had just come back from his business trip. He seemed rested but slightly embarrassed. Without a word, he hugged her and said, "I missed you." She smiled at him, hiding the victory in her eyes. Rachel, in turn, sent her a short text message. "Everything went according to plan. We're keeping in touch." Now, all Emma had to do was wait for the moment when she would present the evidence. She decided not to rush. First, she needed to make sure of the details of their prenuptial agreement and the division of assets. For this, Emma found a good lawyer, not through connections to avoid raising suspicion, but via online recommendations. Mr. Brown, the lawyer, listened attentively and asked for details. To his surprise, Emma openly confessed that she planned to use the evidence of infidelity. He clicked his tongue. "It's not the best move morally, but legally, you have the right. If you have proof, you could probably claim a significant settlement, especially if Mr. Whitman doesn't have an agreement that would prevent you from claiming assets in case of infidelity. Usually, wealthy people don't include clauses like that, but still." After reviewing the paperwork, it turned out that there were no clauses protecting Marek in case of his infidelity. Emma breathed a sigh of relief. Her plan could indeed bring her enormous benefits. The question was when to pull the brakes on this marriage. The lawyer advised, "It's better to file the suit when you're sure you have irrefutable evidence and witnesses. Then Marek will have to negotiate, or his reputation will be at stake." Emma decided to set everything up so the strike would be sharp and final. She scheduled a meeting with Marek in their city apartment for an evening when she knew he would be free. She told him that they needed to talk about something serious. Marek came home, saw her tense face, and was puzzled. "Emma, what's wrong? You're shaking." She gathered her courage and said, "I know about your affair with another woman, and I have proof." His face changed. A shadow seemed to pass over his eyes. He initially tried to deny it. "What nonsense!" But Emma calmly pulled out a tablet, opened the photos and videos from the detective. Marek froze. On the screen, it was him. hugging and kissing Rachel in the restaurant and in the hotel lobby. "Where did you get this?" he asked, barely audible. "It doesn't matter," Emma coldly replied. "What matters is that you betrayed me." She could see him struggling to come up with an excuse, but the photos were undeniable. He dropped his hands helplessly, swallowed a lump in his throat. "Listen, Emma," Marek began. "It's not as it seems. Yes, I was with her, but it happened by accident. God, if I had known how this would end—" "That's enough," she interrupted. "I want a divorce, and I don't care how you explain it. I just can't be with you anymore." She pretended to be barely holding back tears, although inside she was celebrating. Marek tried to say something, to approach her, but she pulled away. "Don't touch me." The evening passed in oppressive silence. Marek seemed stunned, not understanding how to fix the situation. He tried to explain, to apologize, but Emma repeatedly said firmly, "We're done." The next morning, she told him she would go stay with a friend so she wouldn't have to see him. She took some things and left the apartment. 2 days later, Marek's lawyer received notice of the intent to file for divorce, citing infidelity as the reason. For Marek, this was like a bombshell. His reputation in business circles could be tarnished if the scandal became public. Moreover, he understood that Emma would most likely not back down without significant financial compensation. Over the following weeks, Marek tried to contact her. Goldador sent messages and attempted to arrange a meeting. Emma replied briefly or not at all. Mr. Brown began negotiations with Marek's lawyer, and they eventually agreed that the best course of action would be to settle out of court. If it went to trial, Marek risked losing even more time and nerves, as well as exposing his private life. Emma stood firm. "I won't settle without a large compensation, or we go to court, and all the delights of publicity." She had already found new housing, a spacious apartment in a fancy neighborhood where she planned to live after the divorce. Rachel, in turn, received her share for her help and went on a few months' vacation in Europe, pleased that she had played the role of the seductress and hadn't been burned. And still, Emma's meeting with Marek took place in a neutral setting, in the conference room of the lawyer's office, where Marek's attorney offered a sum that Emma considered insufficient. She insisted on a larger figure, pointing out the huge moral damage caused by his actions and the irrefutable evidence of infidelity. Marek looked dejected, suddenly much older. He said in a barely audible voice, "Emma, I understand that I'm at fault, that I gave in to weakness, but what you're asking for is simply beyond reason." She lowered her gaze and said, "I'm not asking for anything you can't give. Just fairness." Fairness, in her understanding, meant several $1 million and the rights to one of the apartments on the north side of Chicago. Marek's lawyer insisted that she had only been married for a year and had no such rights, but Emma responded that his betrayal had ruined her life, that she was now in depression, experiencing moral suffering, and so on. After several tense negotiations, the sides agreed Emma would divorce without going to court if Marek paid her a large sum into her bank account and transferred part of a small property, specifically one of the apartments, which was not a critical asset for the business, into her name. It was important that the scandal didn't make it to the press. Emma assured them that she wouldn't give any loud interviews if Marek met her demands. Thus, they soon signed the divorce settlement. Emma officially gained her freedom and a substantial amount of assets to start her new life. Merrick, though angry, understood that dragging it out would only hurt him more. He tried to see it as a lesson, though he felt bitterness. The divorce happened quietly, in the presence of lawyers and an authorized official. Emma was 25 at the time of the divorce. Now she had money and property in Chicago, and she could afford not to work. She realized that, in a sense, she had achieved her original goal: to marry a wealthy man and gain financial advantage. And yet, watching Marek, once the man who held her in his arms, now walking out of the courtroom with slumped shoulders, she felt a strange sense of emptiness. Maybe it had gone too far. After all, he wasn't a bad person. Yet, quick memories of her past poverty in Cedar Grove, her struggles, and her parents' advice to marry well seemed to justify her actions in her own eyes. Over time, journalists began to spread rumors about the divorce, but Marek and his lawyers skillfully hushed up the situation, and it didn't make much of a splash. Emma moved into her new apartment with a panoramic view, did an expensive renovation, bought herself a car, and finally felt truly independent. She no longer needed to look for a man to support her. Now she could control her own fate. People around her began to emerge, looking for easy money, throwing admiring looks at her. But Emma was now experienced enough not to let casual acquaintances get too close. Sometimes she wondered what happened to Marek. Of course, it wasn't easy for him after the blow, but he remained the owner of a large business, and most likely he was managing. His pride and reputation had taken a hit, but life experience probably helped him stay afloat. Deep inside, she hoped that he would find his way and be happy, though betrayed by her. As for Rachel, she returned from Europe, settled in Miami for a while, then continued to roam the world. They occasionally exchanged messages, but only about trivial matters, without touching on their shared scheme. Rachel didn't feel guilty, treating everything as an adventure. "Oh, well, he's rich. It's not like he's hurting," she'd joke. Now financially secure, Emma began trying her hand at being an emerging entrepreneur. She invested in a beauty salon, similar to the one she had once worked at. Sandra Wells, meeting her randomly in the city, smiled and said, "Girl, you've made a dizzying career in such a short time," though she didn't know the real details of how Emma had acquired her funds. Months passed, and Emma found herself thinking more and more about what she really wanted from life now. She had the money, the status. Her dreams of fashionable parties and travels had become a reality. Yet, inside, she didn't feel the celebration she had expected. Perhaps she missed real feelings, some genuine love that didn't fade before financial calculations. But she had grown accustomed to thinking pragmatically, and if guilt ever stirred inside her, she silenced it with shopping, business successes, and new acquaintances evenings, sitting on the terrace of her apartment and watching the sunset paint Lake Michigan in rosy orange tones. She thought, what's next? Her story with Marek was over, giving her a chance to be independent, but it had deprived her of something deeper, the ability to trust men. Or maybe that ability had been taken from her in childhood by her upbringing and life circumstances. Soon new projects emerged, new opportunities. Emma started her own blog, where she shared stories of her luxurious life in the city, gave style and self-care tips. She tried to build an image of a successful, happy woman who pursued her goals and achieved them. Her followers admired her effortless style, looking at her expensive bags, dresses, and travels. Only a few wondered what price she had paid for all of it. One day, when autumn was on the calendar and the city was drowning in golden hues, Emma received a letter from an unknown sender. It contained just a few lines. "I hope you're doing well now. Don't forget how you got all of this." Signed, Jack Lawrence, the very same detective. He didn't demand money, nor did he threaten her. He just reminded her that he was aware of the whole story. Emma placed the letter on the table and pondered. A flutter of anxiety stirred inside her. After all, if someone wanted, her machinations could come to light. On the other hand, she hadn't broken any laws. Marek had indeed cheated on her, even though it had been a planned trap. But life is unpredictable, and no one is immune from the consequences of fate. Emma's gaze shifted to the window. Outside, behind the wide glass, the rain was starting to fall, and the violet clouds reflected in the waters of the lake. In front of her, the lights of cars rushed along the evening highways of Chicago. The city lived, breathed, pulsed, and with it, Emma Carter continued on her path. She had made a choice, a tough and cynical one, and only time would show whether it would bring her true happiness. However, at that moment, she was satisfied. Everything she had once wanted, she had obtained. As for the rest, life always gives a chance to rewrite the story, to start a new cycle. And maybe one day, a real feeling would ignite in her heart, one that wouldn't require manipulation, lies, and plans to seize someone else's fortune. But that would be an entirely different story, and it's unlikely that it could be calculated as coldly and inaccurately as Emma did with her ex-husband. Because sincere love, unlike money, doesn't follow plans. It can't be programmed or played out in a script. It either happens or it doesn't. So ends the chapter in which Emma fulfills her long-held dream, sacrificing much, perhaps more, of value. And though the reader may leave these pages with a sense of ambiguity about her actions, Emma herself, standing at the window and looking out at the grey waves, knew that she still had a future. A future in which she is no longer the naive girl from Cedar Grove, but a confident woman ready for new challenges. Will she remain happy in her new life and with her new money? Will entrepreneurship bring her satisfaction? Will she find love? Or will the past come back to haunt her, making her pay the bills? The questions are open. But now, on this fall evening, she felt free and in control of her destiny. At least, that's how it seemed to her.